My name is Hani Fish-Bieler, and I major in sociology and women, gender, and sexuality studies and minor in legal studies. And I'm so grateful for the support of the Center for Race, Ethnicity, and Equity as I completed my senior thesis entitled Justice for All, Political Consciousness and Acts of Resistance in the Missouri Carceral System. So my main research question was, how does the experience of incarceration engender political consciousness and or acts of resistance, and how does it impede it? And I sought answers to these questions through interviews with formerly incarcerated individuals in the Missouri carceral system. So in my conversations, I found that many individuals had been the subject of harassment by correctional officers in their time incarcerated. And broadly, this created a culture of fear wherein even those people who weren't being actively harassed knew that that was a potential outcome. And it really shaped their experience while they were incarcerated. So many of my participants sought remedy for this dynamic, and they might have done this in one of a few ways. One way that people sought remedy was through filing formal grievances through the mechanisms purportedly available through the Department of Corrections. Some people sought to educate themselves on the legal system in the hopes that they could use that education to better their conditions. And then finally, some people sought early release on parole by padding their resumes and working really hard while they were incarcerated in the hopes that they could sort of sway the parole boards to let them out and away from these harassers. So ultimately, unfortunately, attempts to utilize these mechanisms were squashed. And as such, people began to develop a kind of political consciousness because they had these expectations that, okay, they're incarcerated, but even if they were going to be treated terribly, they should be able to have some form of recourse through the state. And that expectation was violated over and over again. And so one participant told me that policy was a perennial topic, but that ultimately people understood that the system just wouldn't help them. And as such, they began often to engage in acts of resistance. So these acts of resistance could look two different ways, either individual or collective. People talked about both. And individual acts of resistance could look like standing up to correctional officers, or engaging in hunger strikes, or engaging in acts of violence. And collective acts might look like labor strikes or hunger strikes or things of that nature. So as I said, individuals entered prison with the belief that they had rights and that they would be able to access those rights. But attempts to access those rights were repeatedly squashed, which resulted in this accumulation of these grievances where people began to understand that the state was going to continue to fail them, and they actually kind of saw the state itself as their adversary. And at this point, in the development of this political consciousness, they were impelled to act because they understood that in order to be heard by anyone within the system, they would have to resist in a way that the system itself would have to respond to. So incarcerated individuals often resist because the prison system repeatedly proves to them that this is the only way for them to change the conditions of their confinement. And I argue that in this way, the prison system actually engenders acts of resistance. The Eighth Amendment of the Constitution is concerned with cruel and unusual punishment, and without any transparency or accountability, the 51,000 Missourians as of 2022 who are behind bars could be experiencing such punishment daily with no recourse. So I would hope in the future for more transparency and accountability within the Missouri Department of Corrections, and also actual remedy available to incarcerated people for when they experience these kinds of things. And ultimately, I also would hope that we can work to reduce the number of people who are incarcerated, thus keeping them out of harm's way.